So I want to thank Gabi, Ezra for including me. It's a pleasure to be here with so many people I don't know and people I know. I'm looking forward to meeting those I don't know. It's a real delight to be here. So thank you. So how do we think about things that don't exist? This is a big problem in all design. Where do new ideas come from, and how can we make them happen? So let's first take a look at thinking. I'm a cognitive psychologist. After all, design thinking is a kind of thinking. So I'm going to show you some examples of thinking. This is thinking. 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 Thinking, thinking, thinking. This is Da Vinci, you'll recognize them, and he invented many new ways of thinking, many new ways to use drawings to think, cutaways, enlargements, juxtapositions, perspectives. They were hidden in his notebook, and people reinvented them much later. Thinking. Drawing your own world and then inhabiting it. Lovely children's book, in case you haven't seen it. It also exists in Hebrew. Thinking. This is thinking about thinking about thinking. So some more thinking. I hope I can get this going. She is reading a description of an environment. She's alone in a room, not talking to anybody. I can do it. Thank you. Alone in a room, not talking to anyone. The description is quite complicated. She's going to be tested, so she's working very hard. And this is how she's thinking. Nobody told them to gesture. About 70% of our participants gesture when they're learning. Their gestures make models of what they're learning. They're usually not looking at their hands, so the models are spatial motor, they aren't visual. And when they make a model like this, when they're studying, they perform much better at test. So he's trying to figure out how a car brake works, again, only from words. And you'll see his gestures will diagram what he's thinking. He makes big ones, and he'll make smaller ones. He's rehearsing, doing it many ways and more than once. Very dramatic. So people do them differently, but they all make, that's not a gesture. They all make models. So here is a woman trying to figure out a schedule. So she does look at her hands a bit. Here, let me get her going. Big gestures. Some people make tiny ones, some we don't catch on cameras. But again, 70% of the people who are trying to learn something make these gestures spontaneously. When we use another group and make them sit on their hands, they don't perform as well, and they say, I can't think without my hands. So it works with pairs of people too. They're planning an escape route or a route to pick up wounded after a hypothetical earthquake. All their conversation is on the diagram, on the map, and in their hands. And they take turns with their hands. They amend each other's gestures. And again, when they can do this together, they perform much better. They're much happier with the collaboration. And they're much more successful at coming up with a good map of the route. So this is a problem with Zoom. We don't have a shared workspace. So here, basketball, where are the words? All the communication is in the body. It's rapid. You have to keep track of your own team. You have to fake out the other team. And these guys, they're guys here, the women too, are absolutely expert at this kind of communication and understanding. It's highly intelligent, highly practiced. Okay, so these ways of thinking share their perceptual action cycles that become highly practiced and routinized, and they change with each cycle. They're adaptive, and they change. The cycle creates, the practice creates expertise, which is domain dependent, just like design. So thinking is doing. Let me go through a quick history of thinking, and they're all a series of revolutions, and it's going to be very quick. First was the behaviorist revolution to make introspections more objective. There was a problem with introspections, so the behaviorists thought we only can make laws between stimuli which we control. This is a black box, no longer, but then, and responses which we can measure. So we have laws between the stimuli we manipulate and the responses that are engendered. This position ran into trouble. A lot of things don't lead to immediate responses, like education. They lead to much later ones. And stimuli are interpreted differently depending on a context, the person, and so forth. So the cognitive revolution says it depends on your perception of the stimuli, how it's represented in the brain. This is an example for mental rotation. And the operation, the thinking is actually, again, hidden in the head. So we have representations and operations in the head, and then we get an output, which is an action, which might be language, it might be some other behavior, might be delayed. Cognitive revolution. So then we had the situated cognitive revolution, which said that what we often do in order to think is externalize our thinking. And you saw that in the many diagrams I showed you and sketches. There are ways of putting the stimuli out in the world. The mind is too small, the world supports it. And we also externalize our actions in the form of gestures. So gestures are actions on ideas. We raise them, we tear them up, we throw them out. You can hardly talk about actions on ideas without using actions on objects. Ideas are like objects, and our actions on them are like the actions we perform on objects. We rotate them, turn them upside down, and that thinking gets turned into gestures like raise, tear apart, throw out, rotate. That gets turned into gestures, and you saw them in those videos of people thinking. So it's a way of externalizing thinking, and then the embodied is we bring them back inside, and again we create these cycles of representations and operations. Representations, we have a limited class of them. They're based on perceptual systems, so they can be language-like, visual spatial, action-like. We don't have abstract representations based on smell or taste, but we do on the other senses, particularly vision and sound. Operations, there are countless, and I'll stop there. So what the mind does is it mixes and matches. This is how we come up with new ideas. We mix and match representations and operations. We run out of space. We put them out in the world in the form of all sorts of cognitive tools that I call putting on a page, but abacuses will do, models will do, sketches will do, and we also re-externalize the actions, the gestures. And when people sit on their hands, it's hard for them to find words. It's not just thinking in these difficult ways that I showed you. Even word finding is hard without gestures. Okay. So this is the outside and the inside. The world is internalized in terms of representations and operations. Thinking is combining and recombining them. We externalize thinking in language, graphics, gesture. We re-internalize, We re-externalize, re-internalize. It creates these perceptual action modules that are changed each time. It's something I've called spraction, which is a combination of space, action, and abstraction. So how do we think about things that don't exist? Through things that do exist in a bottom-up way, but also in a top-down way by going abstract and thinking about goals, principles, properties, theories. We do both. So now how to give advice. And that's what I was trying to do. If everyone's a designer, but we need expertise in the particular area of design, how can we give advice that's applicable everywhere, but also specifically and not trivial? And this is hard. The core issues never change. You see them reinvented whenever creativity or design is discussed in many, many different fields. You have to think broadly, you have to think deeply, and you have to get out of a rut. And how do you do that? So how do you do it? And what I'm going to suggest, I'm going to be audacious and give advice, is that we wander, play, focus, repeat. So thought is associative. Chair leads to table, umbrella leads to rain, shoe leads to foot. And associations, and pictures lead to more concrete associations. Words lead to more abstract ones. This is something we and others have studied. I'm going to skip Locke. Associations come from contiguity in space or time. They increase they get stronger with frequency, duration, similarity, vividness. Again, this has been studied for a long time. Strong associations are really good for memory. Where did you park your car? Where are your keys? How to do arithmetic, algebra, whatever it is you need to know. Having strong associations, good memories, this is what education is about, is really good for expertise and for memory. You need those basketball skills and designing skills to be a good player. But strong associations lead to fixation. So what's good for memory is bad for innovation. To innovate, we need new associations. And this is what I've called the first law of cognition. Everything has advantages and disadvantages. Strong associations are excellent for memory and expertise. They're bad for innovation. We need both. And who said life would be easy? So how do we find new stimuli for new responses? One way that's been suggested and has been in the news a lot is to wander. Let your mind wander, let your body wander. Messy desks creates more creative uses of a ping pong ball. Walking on a treadmill gives you more uses for a tire and a button. Wandering in your mind, wandering in the world. Mind wandering, telling people to just let your mind go. Gives more alternative uses than incubation with an intense task. These are all experiments that I could cite. There's even an explanation. It's in your brain. It's neuroscience. Okay, we have a bit of phrenology. So it's the default network, and then they show you beautiful pictures of the default network. You know, this makes it authentic. The default network is what fires when there's no external stimuli. This was an interesting piece of research because all the research on fMRI had been done with strong stimuli. What happens if you don't give anyone a stimulus? They're in this magnet, their eyes are closed, their ears are stuffed up because the noise is terrible. What happens? Their mind wanders, the default network operates. So this was supposed to be the explanation for why mind wandering is good. But then new research on the default network, this is again brain pictures, that the default network can be quite focused. It's not unitary. It has many components. It can be quite focused. If you're really thinking hard, it's not that you're letting your mind wander. And I think anyone who does design knows that you have to mind wander with a mission. So we decided to compare mind wandering, this is Julia Chow, mind wandering with role playing, essentially role playing, empathetic design, human-centric design. We used the new association task. People had one of three mindsets, mind wander, or human-centric, empathetic, or a control that had no particular mindset. I have the instructions here, but I'm not going to go through them. The objects were, I'm worried about time. We pre-tested objects that actually elicited a lot of ideas. These were our objects, and we ran it on MT. We've run it several times, 35 participants. Each condition, a huge age range and professional range. This is why we use new uses, because anybody can do it. And look for the orange bars. Those are the human-centric mindset. This is the control group. That's the mind wandering. In every case, the human-centric gives more ideas than the mind wandering. Mind wandering is no different from the control that was given no mindset. This is each object. Again, the orange bars are the human-centric. People were told to think of how an artist would use this object. Think of how a gardener would use it. Think about how a physician would use it. So they could adopt many different roles. Roles are extremely rich. Even tiny children know roles because they interact with people with roles. They're asked, what do you want to be when you grow up? So they know about roles, rich associations with them, and people could generate many uses by adopting these roles. And we checked their uses, and in fact, in over half the cases, they used our roles, and then they invented new ones that we hadn't thought about. We also found that we got more original ideas with the human-centric. These were ideas that only 3 people thought of, and more unique ideas, again, with the human-centric. Here are some of the data. A broom, ordinary use, cobweb remover, scarecrow, weapon. Everything can be a weapon. This was discouraging. Original uses that only 3 people or fewer came up with. Straw hat, wood flavoring, mini golf course, fragrance holder. Flashlight, original uses, meat tenderizer, martini shaker, bowling game. Chair, original, spokes for a loom. Cutting board, skyscraper for a dollhouse. So you can see these original uses were really quite clever. They all bring a smile. For those of you who are interested in roles, artist was the top. That led to the most new associations, and firefighter wasn't so good. So human-centric better than mind-wandering. Both can release fixation, but human-centric provides a search strategy. So it's not just eliminating old associations, you need a way to search for new ones. So human-centric might not work for everything, but basically human-centric is perspective taking. It's taking different perspectives, and taking different perspectives just might work for everybody. So super forecasters are an example. These are people who predict world events reliably better from ordinary people year after year. And these are some of their attributes. What super forecasters in essence do is they change perspectives. They take perspectives of other people, of other evaluators, other countries, whatever you have. They also challenge their perspectives. How could it go wrong? So, cancer, I can give you more examples. I'm going to run out of time. But we've found, looking at the literature, that perspective switching underlies just many, many creative tasks. You can take someone else's, you can go abstract. Going abstract is often hard. So wandering, you want to do in time and space, in your mind, with other minds, but choose who you wander with and how you wander. Don't get lost. And when you get a vague idea, get another one, and another one, and another one. Don't stop with one. Then you play. Gabi's done a great deal of work on that. John, many other people in this room. One of my graduate students worked on artists playing in their own sketches, getting new ideas from their own sketches. And again, I don't have time to go into it. How to play, find similarities, analogies, deconstruct an old one, change perspective. These are ways to find similarities, analogies, ways to play, and so forth. Then you focus. You test, you get feedback, you test again, you get more feedback, you challenge your idea, how could it go wrong? So you wander, play, focus, repeat. When do you stop? You'll know. You'll know when you're done. So you all have regards from Cindy Atman, and she contacted, I know many of you, for your ways, what advice would you give to designers? She's been teaching a marvelous course on it, and one of her students adopted this, my advice, which I'd written out in a couple of pages for Gaetano. Thank you for organizing that special issue. It made me focus my ideas. And one of the students documented his design process in terms of wander, play, focus, repeat, and he ended up making a quilt. This is of his design process. So and he found this way of reflecting on what he was doing quite useful. So this is a plug. And a more general way of looking at this is that spatial thinking is the foundation of all thought. It's not the whole story, it's just the foundation. And what do I mean by spatial thought? It's moving in space and interacting with things in space. So thank you. Sorry I went so fast, but thank you again for the opportunity to present these ideas.